Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic for you today, one of my favorites. Let's do it. What's the craziest rabbit hole you have ever been down? Please remember to like, share, hype, ask, and hear more shoutouts, and subscribe. Have a great day. The People's Temple and the Jonestown mass suicide. It's pretty effed up. A cult leader convinced followers to kill themselves and insisted it would be painless, but it wasn't. They killed a bunch of kids, too. There's a declassified FBI audio recording. It's very easy to find. Don't listen to it. If you read the articles, you'll have a good understanding of what went down. I've seen all sorts of effed up S on the internet, but that recording stuck with me. The babies crying and slowly becoming silent, and the cult leader's disturbing voice as he reassures the parents that watched their kids die and are starting to feel the effects of the drugs themselves. He talks in a similar pace and tone to Trump doing speeches. It's really unnerving how dangerously convincing people like them are to some people. I don't mean to get political, LOL. I think most would agree they have similar speech patterns. John McAfee and his search for original bath salts. Many years ago, I read an article or interview with John McAfee on Gizmodo, I think. It talked about how he fled the country and bought some compound in the rainforest to cure diseases. He hires some scientist woman, invites her to some party, and tells her to leave her coat in the bedroom. Also in the bedroom is a big black trash bag full of Viagra pills. If I remember correctly, he tries to F her. She quits to tell trash bag dick pill story. I scroll down to the comments of the post, and one of the commenters posts a link to some Russian-based chemistry forum, saying that there's a post allegedly by JM himself. This poster is looking for the original formula bath salts, not the current stuff. The old school bath salts apparently turn white during a process, and the new ones turn black. The white means it can be processed into a super Viagra. I am by no means a chemist, but I was up for hours reading, I want to say 90 plus pages about original bath salts and homemade boner pills. My apologies if this is formatted weird or read strange. I really wanted to get as much of this out of my lunch break. Mayhem and the extension 1990s Norwegian black metal as a whole. The Wikipedia articles, the German ones at least, are almost hilariously effed up. They contain casual passages such as, by the time their debut album was released, most band members were in jail. Member number 1 for murder of a homosexual, member 2 and 3 for arson. The second album, black metal fans sure are masters in separating art and artist. I grew up in a sundown town. Well, towns. The whole area, I didn't know it growing up. I attended private church meetings with friends. They were Triple K meetings. The whole town was Triple K, or if they wanted to get fancy, were part of the Masons. You had to have money to be a Mason, though, so it was a status symbol. Anytime I hear someone say, "I don't see color," it makes my skin crawl, because that was a kind of code. As children, we got the privilege to not see color. But when the sun went down, if someone was darker than olive, they'd just disappear. After I was 18, my parents found out I was hanging out with someone who was a quarter black. They broke into his house and took both me and him, locked us in their Escalade, drove both of us back to their house, took us through the backyard, locking it behind them. They didn't want him going in the house because of his skin color. They proceeded to threaten his life. This was very normal to me. Being taken from one place to another, next, not having control over my body or who I hung out with. Anywho, poor guy jumped to the nearest, safest city after being drove home by my parents without me. He never told me what they said during the drive. I saw my first actual black person at 32. This was when I finally left the state. They are actually people with all skin colors that walk around freely, not in chains, not in stripes. I still flinch going back to my hometown if I see a black person outside, and it's out of fear for the person's safety. You're not supposed to be here. Most information was omitted to keep it safe for readers. Look up the Bogomils, another rabbit hole to go down, so to speak. In brief, the Bogomils were a sect that believed in dualism. There was a strict division between the world, which was evil, and the spirit, which was good. Catholics accuse them of being so anti-birth, tying a spirit into this bad world, that they practiced anal sex only. Hence, the very word buggery ultimately derives from this ancient sect. This Church of Euthanasia seems a lot like the Catholic view of the beliefs of Gnostic sects like the Bogomils. What our Bogomils actually believed is difficult to say for sure, as almost all we know about them is from Catholic sources. There's a funny story about how I learned about the Bogomils, Cathars, etc. It was literally in my church-mandated marriage lessons. What happened was this. I am not Christian. However, my wife is Ukrainian Catholic. She wanted to get married in the church, thus I had to take Catholic marriage lessons from the priest. This was nothing like I was expecting. I pictured some sort of class. No, this was one-on-one for weeks at a time at the priest's house. The priest was an ancient fellow with a perfectly black beard that came to a point. He sort of looked like a caricature of Satan. His house was a creepy old mansion with every room filled from floor to ceiling with books, some in great piles with bookmarks everywhere. The first time I went, we were sitting in his study. He literally had his housekeeper set a fire in the fireplace. We were sitting in huge armchairs, again surrounded by books. To break the ice, I said something like, "It looks like a lot of these books are on medieval history. That's very interesting to me." His face, which had been gloomy at the chore ahead of him, lit up. "You're interested in history?" I replied. That I certainly was. As it turned out, he was an amateur scholar, deeply interested in medieval heresies. That's what all these books in several different languages were about. For the rest of our sessions together, that's literally all he talked about. I didn't mind. It was very interesting. Like getting a university education in this obscure issue. He had basically zero interest in attempting to teach me about Catholic marriage, so the ostensible reason for me being there was simply forgotten, and instead I learned about, among other things, the strange sexual habits imputed to the Bogomils. I certainly did not expect to be taught about medieval anal sex techniques as part of my Catholic marriage lessons. Okay, like I said, definitely one of my favorite topics. We can talk 9/11, JFK, so many conspiracies or rabbit holes, I should say. Let me not say conspiracy. But what we're here for are the shout-outs. So again, good ones today, and I do want to reach out. I'm going to peek over at my paper here, but I want to say hi to Sonny Goldman. Thank you so much. Arthur Dent 8789. Also great that you're here. Wee James 1640. Also, thank you very much. And then finally, I'm assuming the MF means mother something, but Killer MF Katie. Hello again. Thank you all for your support. If you want to send any well wishes, birthdays, etc., things like that, just let me know. I'll almost say anything, so why not? Say hi. And again, thanks for being here, guys. See you soon. Chan. Someone finds a shitty hand-drawn Sonic the Hedgehog Pokemon crossover webcomic on DeviantArt, Turns out the guy drawing it is a 30-year-old man. As the internet uncovers more and more about this man, they discovered he lives in a poor family and has what one might call a bad case of high-functioning autism. His life is a total train wreck that mostly involves hounding women and buying Sonic the Hedgehog stuff, doing what they do best. The internet decides to take advantage of this guy and get as involved in his life as they possibly can. Things just go from bad to worse. It's discovered that Chris isn't just autistic, he very likely has a severe case of narcissism and outright stupidity. Alongside his comic, Chris has been and still is doing a series of personal vlogs where one can see Chris's dirty living conditions, horrible misuse of welfare checks, terrible fashion sense, and obsession with his character Sonichu. The man walks around wearing a handmade clay medallion of his Sonic OC around his neck, never takes it off and claims it gives him power. For a basic summary of all the interesting events of Christory, someone on 4chan pretended to be a woman to steal his medallion. It worked. Chris got arrested after pepper spraying a GameStop employee because Sonic's arms are not blue. And most recently, Chris has become a lesbian-identifying male and wears women's clothing. That's just a highly abridged version. The rabbit hole just goes deeper and deeper. Saw an episode of Mad Men one time. They're eating at a picnic. Finish. Wife just picks up blanket, shaking it out, letting all the trash just blow away wherever. Don Draper finishes his drink and just chunks it. Led me down the rabbit hole wondering why they showed that. Learned how, prior to those years, nothing really was trash prone. You bought it and kept it. Suddenly, companies were making one-time use products, and there was no trash bins in society to properly rid of the products. So littering became very problematic. Anti-littering campaigns started popping up, placing blame on consumers rather than companies, now making cheap one-time use products. Regardless, it took a whole generation or more to change the norm and habits of people to start being responsible and throwing away all this one-time use stuff now. It also explained the visible gap in habits I'd seen when I was a teen and working odd jobs cleaning up. Older silent era, older baby boomers, aged people were the ones who did not pick up after themselves, leaving such a mess in parks and the theater I worked in. Younger customers would clear everything and toss everything away as they left. Younger generations were engrossed with anti-littering campaigns growing up. Older generations weren't, and older habits are hard to break. Whole childhoods of just tossing trash wherever and trying to break such habits seems as difficult as what some smokers go through trying to quit. As the older generations have died off, I see the difference. Stadiums aren't as trashed out after games as they used to be. A lot more patrons pick up after themselves now. All this realization and connection from after seeing one short scene in a park of an episode of Mad Men. The Urantia Papers. The backstory is that a sleep-talking man in 1925 Chicago was saying deep and compelling religio-philosophical insights. The sleeping subject had no memory of anything he talked about in his sleep. It was like another being was communicating through his sleeping body, but it wasn't just one being, it was multiple beings who claimed to represent the celestial body of the time-space universe. Eventually, 200 scientists, psychiatrists, were attached to this sleep-talking man, and they conversed with the celestial being in private for a long time, until they came out with a 2,000-page book called Urantia. Urantia is what the celestial beings call Earth. It involved a lot of Earth's history and history of evolution, and discusses many Christian figures and events, and also addresses the celestial being own jobs and failures and looking after the earth and humans, and our own soul's evolution and ability to evolve further. I found it entirely fascinating. I recently found out about Betalism, and wow, that was a wild ride. Basically, it was a fringe group of trans women who believed that trans misogyny, aka bigotry against trans women, was the root cause of all bigotry, which doesn't sound so bad on its own, but in practice, lead to some not good beliefs. Essentially, it morphed into the idea that 1. Trans people don't even really exist. Any trans person who isn't a male to female trans woman isn't truly trans. 2. That people who are assigned female at birth, including cis women, inherently have privilege because by virtue of being female. And 3. That the only people a Betal can ever trust and should engage with is other Betals. Even other trans women who didn't follow their ideology were made out to be an enemy. Unsurprisingly, this insistence that only other members of the movement were safe and trustworthy wound up being used by bad actors. It was generally seen as impossible for a trans woman to ever be abusive or predatory, and as a result, some trans women who spoke out about experiencing SA by other trans women. I should mention that another big tenet of the movement was that trans women should only ever be in relationships with other trans women. So obviously a lot of people in the movement were dating other members, were ostracized from their community. At one point, a prominent member of the movement was accused of SA, and the community came together to protect this person. Thankfully, that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back and caused the movement to collapse. But to be honest, you can still find some remnants of their ideology in certain queer circles to this day. I'm down one pretty deep one right now. I went to a for-profit art school in California 20 years ago. I've been a huge researcher and advocate for canceling student loan debt traps for folks who ended up at a for-profit diploma mill. I've only recently discovered that Richard Blum, Senator Dianne Feinstein's husband, was a majority shareholder of both ITT and CEC, two of the largest for-profit school companies. It was also a huge investor. Blum was also a regent for the entire UC system and controlled the portfolio of the University of California system, as well as the public pension for California's public workers. He used the UC endowment and retirement portfolio to invest in these scam schools, while at the same time raising tuition costs at all UC schools to push poor people into the for-profit schools. Feinstein was also a huge investor and voted accordingly. The two of them made billions, which the student borrowers are stuck in lifetime of crushing debt for worthless degrees. She's the fourth wealthiest senator that currently holds office. Pizzagate. I knew it was bullshit, are you sure? But I just wanted to see where the conspiracy would lead me if I actually tried to follow some of the theories behind it. Most of this conspiracy is built upon a logical fallacy. I think it's called the snow job fallacy, where you overwhelm someone with a bunch of information that suggests but never proves anything. It can be very persuasive because people look at these mountains of evidence and assume it provides something, but they never actually do any digging. There was a theory that John and Tony Podesta had something to do with the Madeleine McCann disappearance. Ultimately, there is nothing there aside from a sketch that looks similar to them, and there were a lot of suspects in that case. You can dig all you want, but there's nothing else to it. There's also Comet Ping Pong, which is not really that different from a lot of hole-in-the-wall music venues that give off a grungy vibe. People were characterizing it as a family pizza restaurant, which was not accurate. Any place that hosts DC hardcore bands is going to have a certain aesthetic. People were creeped out just by looking at some of the pictures of the place and let their imaginations run wild. Back in high school, 1997 to 2001, I was very unhappy with my Catholic faith and was exploring other philosophies and faiths. In my internet searches, I came across Scientology. Knowing nothing, I began digging into it and almost immediately discovered Operation Clambake and other sources. They shared the dark side of the cult and exactly what they get up to. Since then, it's been a topic I'm really fascinated by. It's not an obsession by any means, but pretty much anytime I see a new book or documentary about Scientology, I immediately goes on my to read or watch list. Another rabbit hole, which I don't think many people are aware of, is the Royal Order of Jesters. They're a very secretive club within the Shriners. Since the Shriners are a club within Freemasonry, the Jesters are a secret club within a secret club within a secret club. They're invitation only, and asking for an invitation or really referencing them at all is a sure way to be blackballed. Their public face, as much as there is one, is that they are a social and entertainment group for wealthy men and nothing more. And that would be easy to accept if they hadn't had some legal problems revolving around human trafficking and underage prostitutes. A federal court in New York several years ago convicted several members, including New York State Supreme Court Justice, of human trafficking for transporting prostitutes across state and international lines. The FEC also investigated a Florida congressman about his ties to the organization and his use of campaign funds in club activities. According to the scant information available, the organization's brand of fun includes strippers and prostitutes as well as drugs, so it's basically a kind of eyes wide shut thing. Anyway, it's not very well known, and with the whole Epstein story, as well as other similar stories, being so public, I'm surprised that these jesters have managed to remain under the radar. In the end, made me realize one thing about Afghanistan war. War is shit. Special forces and governments will lie for the sake of optics and recruiting, and no one wins in that part of the world. I once spent an entire night reading up on old folklore stories, mysteries surrounding disappearings, and other stuff, linking it together. For example, the Russian sleep experiment creepypasta, which is of course fake, but you search for any history or data along the story, which leads up to other strange experiments made by Russians or others with articles, journals, and findings, which led to other stuff. And you always end up on some crappy basic HTML website with broken links. Or vampires. Always funny to research about because we scientifically can't explain any of that shit, so you're very skeptical, but there are thousands, and I mean more than thousands probably, of stories, witnesses, journals, and myths surrounding this, and then you find shit like the Aztecs even mentioning vampire type of creature in their stories, drawings, and walls, and you can't help but wonder where these stories originated from. So you go deeper until you end up on some crappy HTML site again where no links work. So, for the Guarapiranga mutilation is the only case that really creeped me out. Sadly enough, the sources in English are very few and all scream of aliens. Wish I could read Portuguese and read the police report. The pictures of the corpse still haunts me. Apparently, it got no media attention at all at the time, and the case was closed due to lack of sufficient evidence to support a murder. So because of that, I also couldn't find any sources that hadn't cited aliens, even in Portuguese. From one of the sources I found, this case first caught public attention in 1993, when a UFO magazine reporter heard of it from a friend that was a dermatologist that had heard of it from his cousin, who was a federal criminal investigator. The reporter then contacted the police department responsible for the case and got the full report 5 years after it had occurred. According to this reporter, the police report said the victim was a 40-something-year-old unidentified male with no signs of fight or resistance. But the victim was alive during most of the incisions. The police report concluded that he had passed out for unknown reasons and was then eaten alive by vultures and rats. 9 years later, in 2002, a Brazilian researcher named Claudier Covo independently studied the case and publicized it in the same UFO magazine that had done the previous report in 1993. Claudier found out that the victim died in Billings Dam, not Guarapiranga, and he also identified the victim named Joaquim Sebastião Goncalves, 53 years old, had epilepsy and Chagas disease. This researcher investigated his life, and according to him, Joaquim used medication, Gardnerol, and was a heavy drinker. He did not live near the place where he died, but he usually went there fishing. He describes the event unfolding this way. He, Joaquim, undressed, left his clothes inside a bag, and threw it in the woods that were close to the dam, and went swimming to the other side so he could go fishing. There, the combination of Gardnerol and heavy alcohol made him pass out. With no one to care for him, he was left there to be eaten alive by vultures and rats, since he was completely irresponsive. Since all incisions were made on soft tissue, rectum, testicles, armpit, groin, tongue, etc., this hypothesis makes a lot of sense. Turns out it is way less mysterious than it seemed to be, and the police was actually on point. That is, if all of that is accurate.